Good morning and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. We're going to return immediately to the reading and discussion of this book that we've been discussing for many weeks now. Very important book. It's called The Global Vatican, and it reveals to us from Roman Catholic hands, a Roman Catholic author, an ambassador of the United States to the Holy See, that the government of the United States literally kowtows to the Vatican. That your tax dollars, whether you be Roman Catholic or not, are spent to support, through the American government, the Roman Catholic Church and the authority of the papacy. Is that the way you would like your tax money spent? A constant preoccupation with the welfare of the papacy? That's certainly not the way I would want my tax dollars spent. And if I have a legitimate reason to protest taxation by this government, is that it takes my money and helps to promote the Antichrist of the Bible. It takes my money and supports the military of this country, which fights wars for the purpose of elevating the Pope to global supremacy. I'm a Protestant, a Bible-believing Protestant, and I know who the Antichrist is, and I protest the Antichrist. Yet I am held by extortion, government-sponsored extortion, and stripped of my wealth to help support the Antichrist of the Bible. The power to tax is the power to tyrannize and to control. This country is in abject rebellion against Christ. Its government is in abject rebellion against Christ and serves Antichrist. That's the hideous reality we've uncovered in this book. Now we're going to continue our reading and discussion where we left off last time. The first full paragraph on page 138, if you're following along in the book. We're talking about the presidency of Ronald Wilson Reagan, an honorary 33rd degree Freemason, an honorary Knight of Malta, a closet Catholic, probably most of his life. Certainly he exposed his Roman Catholic leanings at the end of his life and all throughout his presidency, surrounding himself with Roman Catholics. Almost his entire cabinet were Roman Catholics, even his speech writer, Peggy Noonan. And yet, all he had to do was publicly state that he was, well, Protestant. And all was well. But he served the Vatican. He served Antichrist. And he betrayed Christ if he ever had allegiance to him. Now, beginning on the last full paragraph on page 138, it says, by the way, by way of review, we're talking about President Reagan and his alliance with Antichrist Pope John Paul II and their joint meddling in Poland to overthrow the so-called communist government of Poland. And the whole thing was just cover for a religious objective, a Roman Catholic objective in Poland. Now it says Solidarity, this is the trade organization created by Lech Walesa by the instigation of Pope John Paul II in his initial visit to Poland after he became Pope. It said Solidarity had grown steadily into a resistance movement against the Polish government. Remember, the Polish government was communist. And we're all taught by the papacy and the press and virtually every other news source that communism is atheistic. But we now know that it was necessary for communism to simply provide the dynamic through which change could be implemented in the world. It was the left side of the left-right Hegelian dialectic, that the apparent opposition that when conflict arose, it gave opportunity for the advancement of papal agenda. So this is that dynamic taking place. It says solidarity had grown steadily into a resistance movement against the Polish government. At the start of 1981, Lech Walesa visited Rome and met the Pope, telling him that nothing could have happened in Poland, quote unquote, without the church. By the spring of 1981, Solidarity had 4 times the membership of the Communist Party and was continuing to expand with the Pope's encouragement. Brezhnev saw the unrest in Poland spreading across the entire Soviet Empire, much as American officials once pictured communism spreading like falling dominoes. Quote, "All of us are deeply alarmed by the further course of events in Poland," unquote, Brezhnev told the Politburo in April 8, 1981, a month before the assassination attempt. This is the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. Quote, "In the meantime, the counter-revolution is on the march all over," unquote. In their efforts to stop the counter-revolution, might the Soviets have found reason to kill the man who was one of its chief inspirations, Pope John Paul II? CIA Director William Casey, also a devout Roman Catholic, a Knight of Malta, head of the CIA, the Catholics in Action. CIA Director William Casey was convinced the Soviets were the prime movers behind the papal assassination plot, a view shared by some members of Congress, but the CIA's investigation revealed little hard evidence to support this conclusion. A final CIA report issued in 1987 reviewed an investigation into the matter by the government of Italy. This investigation raised more questions than it answered. According to at least one source, the Pope himself believed the Soviets were behind the attack, but he never publicly said so, and in any case, he seemed more interested in moving forward, even going so far as to forgive Atka, that is the name of his attempted assassin, in person, than in wondering who had tried to kill him. High nobility for the Pope, isn't it, to forgive his assassin in public for all the world to see. But we think he suspects that the Soviets were behind it, but no proof is ever made. Kind of sounds like a charade to me. Maybe a papal inside job. Maybe the Pope was never shot in the first place. Maybe they just surgically implanted the apparent wounds to support the theory. Listen, that might sound like an outrageous accusation, but given the history of the papacy, it's certainly within plausible possibility. Now, whether or not the Soviets had anything to do with the attempt on the Pope's life, they were squarely and blatantly behind efforts to block John Paul II's influence in Poland. With the anti-government demonstrations, strikes, and threats of more strikes, calls for free elections, and demands for civil rights, the Soviets could see Poland slipping from their iron grip. The Soviets and the iron grip. I just can't help but think who the Bible attributes this iron grip to. The Bible attributes it to Rome, not the Soviet Union. But nonetheless, they pressured the Polish government to take action. That action finally came in late 1981. It began late in the evening of December 12th. As phone lines in much of the country went dead, shutting off communication with the outside world, army tanks rumbled into downtown Warsaw. Kind of like eventually it's going to happen right here in the United States. He said thousands of Solidarity activists, including Lech Walesa, were rounded up within hours, many of them charged with treason. Martial law was in effect and would remain so for as long as it took to restore order in Poland. At least that is what the Polish military and the Soviet masters thought. In fact, martial law was the beginning of the end of the totalitarian grip that had held Eastern Europe tight for the last 4 decades. Now, I won't go into it in great detail, but if you're familiar with the so-called Marian apparition of Fatima, you can fold that into your understanding of what is literally taking place here. The fall of the Soviet Union and the victory of the Roman Catholic Church over atheist communism. It has to do with the third secret of Fatima. The Vatican really, through this, is trying to fulfill false prophecy. Prophecy attributed to their goddess, Mary. And so this is how they prove that the Roman Catholic Church is the true church of Jesus Christ. Now, it says, for the United States, the developments in Poland may have been a shock, but they were not entirely a surprise. The CIA had a highly placed mole in the Polish General Staff office, the remarkably courageous Colonel Reinhard Kuklinski, who had provided thousands of documents to the CIA in the 1970s and 80s. Not only was Kuklinski aware of the preparations for martial law that were underway in Poland over the previous year, he wrote some of the plans himself. Within a few days of the plan's approval in September, he delivered it to his CIA contacts in Warsaw. Unfortunately, Kuklinski was no longer in Poland when the hammer came down because he had been exfiltrated from the country. The Kuklinski saga is a sideshow to the larger drama of Poland in the early 1980s, but it offers an intriguing insight into the breadth and depth of espionage activities among the CIA, KGB, and Vatican at the time. Prior to the imposition of martial law in Poland, at least 2 high-level American officials had met with the Pope to share some of what they knew about Poland. One of the Pope's visitors was CIA Director William Casey, again, a Roman Catholic, a Knight of Malta, head of the CIA. He was a devout, oath-spitting warrior and servant of the papacy. As a Knight of Malta, he swore his first allegiance in a blood oath to the Pope and to extend his kingdom over the globe. That is the very essence of the Knight of Malta. It's a military order. It is much like the Jesuits, and its purpose is to elevate the papacy to world supremacy and to attack anyone who assails him, whether by word or deed. Okay, they are warriors in protection and advancement of the papacy. That's what the Knight of Malta is all about. CIA William Casey was an oath-spitting Knight of Malta. Now, see how your tax dollars were put to work? You paid the salary of CIA, Knight of Malta, Director of the CIA, Protector of the Pope. The power to tax is the power to tyrannize. The power to tax is the power to hold you subject to the Roman Pontiff without your knowledge. He says another was General Vernon Walters, former deputy director of the CIA and now a roving ambassador for Ronald Reagan, who arrived in Rome in September of 1981. Walters shared intelligence with the Pope, including satellite reconnaissance shots of Polish troops. That's right, your tax dollars put up the satellites, produced the images, and your tax dollars supported the transfer of those images to the Vatican, the papacy, the Antichrist of the Bible. He says he may also have shared Colonel Kuklinski's information about martial law planning in Poland. In any case, soon after Walter's visit to the Vatican, the KGB informed the Polish military that they had a mole within their general staff. The possibility exists that Kuklinski was betrayed by a Soviet bloc spy inside the Vatican. In interviews with Polish media years after the fact, Kuklinski revealed that he had been told by Polish military intelligence officials that the Vatican was indeed the source of the leak. See how the game's played? It says, as John Kohler details in his book Spies in the Vatican, the KGB and other Eastern Bloc intelligence services were spying on the Vatican for years before John Paul II came to power. Communist spies managed to tap Vatican telephone lines and intercept Vatican telegraphs. At one point, as I've told by a senior Holy See diplomat, the Vatican discovered that the Soviets were remotely eavesdropping on the Pope's conversations from their residence, Villa Abimelech, on Janiculum Hill, using a detection method called laser beam eavesdropping to monitor the voice-generated vibrations on the windows of the Apostolic Palace. If this was an invasion of the Pope's privacy, it was also a kind of backhanded compliment. Remember, Stalin had dismissed the importance of the papacy by his quote. Remember, Stalin asked, how many military divisions does the Pope have? But Stalin's successors knew better, says this author. So, the hierarchy of the communist regime in the Soviet Union knew and acknowledged, while Stalin tried to make light of it, they acknowledged the global importance of the Vatican. Now it says by 1980, the KGB was making a concerted effort to step up its spying efforts. One plot involved sending a group of Ukrainian priests, which is, Ukraine being current in the news now. This is information that'll help us understand what is literally taking place in the Ukraine and what's really behind all the conflict. One plot involved sending a group of Ukrainian priests who had been recruited and trained by the KGB to Rome for infiltration into the Vatican. These spies were soon routed out by the Vatican's resident counterintelligence expert, Father Robert Graham, S.J., Jesuit priest, chief of counterintelligence at the Vatican. Let me tell you, the Jesuits are the creme de la creme of intelligence gathering perfection. And who would ever think that a monastic order, a simple religious order, as most people would perceive the Jesuits, to be so sophisticated in their intelligence and counterintelligence expertise? Look, they wrote the book on intelligence and counterintelligence. They wrote the book on espionage. They wrote the book on national and international intrigue, false information, manipulation of the world's masses. There's no greater intelligence organization on the planet than the Jesuit order. And it's to their tune that the world dances. It's in their ability within their intelligence circles to be able to foment wars at a whim. And that's what they do. He says one plot involved sending a group of Ukrainian priests who had been recruited and trained by the KGB to Rome for infiltration into the Vatican. These spies were soon routed out by the Vatican's resident counterintelligence expert, Father Robert Graham, S.J., a Jesuit priest, the Society of Jesus, that's what S.J. stands for. The same Father Graham, whose 1959 book on Vatican diplomacy I have quoted liberally in these pages, and who, along with his work as church scholar, developed a sideline expertise as a spy catcher for the Vatican. Oh, it's just a little hobby of his, right? Despite the counterintelligence efforts of Graham and the Vatican, communist spies did manage to infiltrate the Pope's inner circle. John Kohler identifies 3 priests, 2 Germans and 1 Pole, as possible KGB plants who may have learned about some of the information provided by the CIA to the Pope. Whoever the source, there was evidently a channel, or several, from the Apostolic Palace to the Kremlin. And that channel may have that channel may have betrayed Kuklinski. The unfortunate result was that Colonel Kuklinski could no longer stay in Poland and send intelligence to the CIA. In November, aware of their best Polish spy was in danger, the agency exfiltrated him and his family from the country and into hiding. Guess who paid for his hiding? You and me. It may seem to follow that American officials held their cards close to their vests when visiting the Vatican after the Kuklinski affair, and perhaps they did, but William Casey and Vernon Walters made many more visits to the Pope in the months and years ahead. One of the first calls William Casey placed after learning that martial law was imposed on Poland was to Cardinal Secretary of State Casseroli to set up a meeting. That's right, Washington just charges right over to Rome every time something happens in the world. Why? Because they know Rome instigates it all. As for Casey's boss, Ronald Reagan, the imposition of martial law in Poland only served to remind him how much he despised communist dictatorships and how much he wanted to reach out to the Vatican and make them an ally. And that's a quote, make them an ally. He wants to make the Vatican an ally. Certainly no Protestant, is he? Now, the term Holy Alliance was coined by journalist Carl Bernstein, and I call it the unholy alliance of Ronald Reagan and the Antichrist. But it says the term Holy Alliance was coined by journalist Carl Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein fame, who first wrote of U.S. Vatican relations for Time magazine in 1992, then later co-authored a book of that term as its title. As described by Bernstein, the President and the Pope undertook an extraordinary coordination campaign in the early 1980s to defeat the communist government in Poland. There had been high-level contacts before martial law was imposed in Poland, as mentioned earlier, including a correspondence of a dozen letters between Reagan and John Paul II. According to Bernstein, however, the true start of the alliance was June 7th, 1982. That was the day Reagan visited the Pope at the Vatican. Reagan and John Paul discussed a number of topics in their 45-minute private chat, including the assassination attempts. Both of them survived. Reagan told the Pope that he believed that he had been spared for a purpose, which brought them to the main topic: their shared concerns and aspirations regarding Poland and communism in the Soviet bloc. There's the unholy alliance of Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II. We'll be back right after the message.
years ahead of the dominant media. FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you'd like to contact me directly, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now, before we get back into the book, I want to ask the question. If Ronald Reagan and the popes got together and together destroyed atheist communism, why, ever since then, has America become more and more communistic? I mean, we're described as a global village. I mean, isn't that kind of communist? I mean, look at the social programs, the socialist programs in this country. We're taxed to death to support all these apparent funds that are supposed to redistribute the wealth of the country and take care of the poor under the name of charity. But look what they do with the money. I mean, people are losing their retirement benefits. The government just plainly confiscating them. That's communism. It's all given to the state to ultimately support the state, not to support the people. That's communism. Why has the United States all of a sudden become so communistic? And not all of a sudden. It's been gradually boiling the communist toad for, ever since the beginning. If you need anything in this country, you have to appeal to the government to get it. The government has become the god of Americans. Isn't that communistic? Where the government becomes the god over the people? That is communism. So what's all this talk about the Pope and the government of the United States going to war jointly against communism? By your fruits you shall know them. All this book is rhetoric. Look at the facts on the ground. You were not liberated. You were not removed from the threat of atheist communism, socialism, with the presidency of Ronald Reagan and the popery of John Paul II. You were thrust right into it. It's all for public show. All the world is a stage. So says the Jesuit author of that quote. All the world is a stage. And while the world thinks that the papacy is against communism and that the government of the United States is against communism, both the Roman Catholic Church and the United States are becoming communistic. Atheistic. Look, if you depend upon the government for your every need, obviously you do not have much faith in God, do you? Or do you? Is the government your God? Certainly every April 15th we bow to the God government, pay our tithes to the government. We're supposed to take care of one another, aren't we? Do we give our government the money that we were supposed to give to those worthy of our gifts? Bible-believing Christians? Taking care of our own so that the government can redistribute the wealth to the heathen of this country? That's exactly what the government does. It takes from the righteous and gives to the wicked. It weakens the righteous and strengthens the wicked. That's what human government does. It's not divine government. See, human government is supposed to serve God. And as long as it serves God, it is to be obeyed. So we must constantly observe our government and make the assessment, does the government serve God or does it serve Antichrist? And this book is all about. This book from cover to cover is all about how the government of the United States serves the Antichrist. That's why I'm reading this book on Inquisition Update, to show you that the government of the United States is completely apostate, has left Christ, and now serves Antichrist. If it ever served Christ at all, it did in name only. And it serves another master, an earthly master, not the heavenly one. And when the government, who has the power to tax, serves the Antichrist, then the money that you pay in taxes also serves the Antichrist. And now you have a conscientious objection, a legitimate, biblical, conscientious objection. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not eat from the king's table. Neither would Daniel. And when they were commanded by Nebuchadnezzar to bow down and worship an image, a man-made image, they would rather go to the fire. How do you square the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with the common ordinary taxpayer of the United States who calls himself who calls himself a Christian. There's a disconnect somewhere, a critical one. All right. Reagan told the Pope that he believed they had been spared, that he had been, or rather they, let me get it right. Reagan told the Pope that he believed they had been spared from their assassination attempts for a purpose, which brought them to the main topic: their shared concerns and aspirations regarding Poland and communism in the Soviet bloc. Okay, they're declaring this that a movement of providence, a movement of God, that both of them experienced assassination attempts, both of them survived, and both of them have a common purpose, and God has put them together to overthrow atheist communism in the Soviet bloc and in Poland. I mean, you just have to believe that Ronald Reagan believed that this Polish Pope was seated on the papal throne by divine right. No protest there, was there? He says, in that meeting, according to Bernstein, Reagan and the Pope agreed to undertake a clandestine campaign to hasten the dissolution of the communist empire. Bernstein goes on to quote Richard Allen, quote, "This was one of the great secret alliances of all time," unquote. Does your government keep secrets from you? Your tax-paid government, does it keep secrets from you? Absolutely. There was a secret agenda between Knight of Malta, Ronald Reagan, and the Pope to do something really big in the world, advance the papal agenda, the Antichrist agenda, on your tax dollars. Operations that you were not privy to. Operations you had no opportunity to protest. Why? Because they don't regard you as having any rights. If you're a protester, you're a heretic. You have no rights. This government supports the Antichrist. It's the only conclusion one can come to in this book. It's a boast. Its entire boast. This entire book constitutes a boast of that reality. He says, in actuality, the collaboration was never quite as dramatic or defined as Bernstein's article described. Perhaps it would be more accurate to call it a symmetry of goals and actions so strong and clear as to make overt coordination unnecessary. Okay? So maybe we shouldn't call it a holy alliance. Maybe it was just, well, they were of the same common spirit, driven for the same, independently of the same goal. But it served the papacy. Okay? He says in an interview for the University of Virginia's Miller Center, Richard Allen acknowledged that the phrase he used with Bernstein, secret alliance, may have given the wrong impression. Quote, "I went to great pains to let him know there was nothing formal about it, that it happened that the Vatican was moving on one track and we on another track. Our tracks were parallel. It wasn't secret by agreement. It was just a secret alliance. Maybe a silent alliance would have been better to describe it, right? A silent alliance. You have a common spirit with the Antichrist. There's something wrong, isn't there? Call it secret. Call it overt. Call it fate, call it what you want. It is global rebellion against Christ. He says the fact that it was not a formal alliance in no way diminishes the remarkable relationship between the United States and the Vatican in the 1980s. Both shared a very real interest in assisting the downfall of the communist regime in Poland and then elsewhere, and collaborated, if informally, in their efforts. It's all about communism, publicly, but secretly it drives the papal wagon. He says those efforts were carried out on the American side mainly by the man who initiated them, William Casey, director of the CIA. Knight of Malta, papal warrior, William Casey. You got to know who these people are and who they serve. This is why there should never be elected to American government any Roman Catholic. And especially not one of these elite military papal orders such as the Knights of Malta or the Knights of Columbus or any other secret society, and especially not Freemasonry, which is completely Jesuit controlled. And there's no mention in this book that William Casey's a Knight of Malta. That would be too much information for you. You have to rely on Inquisition Update and other people who are researching these matters to tell you what the importance of these things are. It says Casey had come to CIA directly from his position as Ronald Reagan's campaign manager. So Ronald Reagan's campaign manager was a Knight of Malta. You think his campaign might have had a Vatican agenda? Absolutely. But he was no novice in spycraft. Look, nobody in the Knights of Malta is a novice in spycraft. And he says, working under William Donovan in the OSS during World War II. William Donovan was a Knight of Malta, an oath-spitting warrior for the Pope, and the founder of the OSS and the entire intelligence community in Washington, D.C., now known as the CIA. It's been Catholics in action ever since the beginning. It's been run and controlled by the experts in global espionage, the Vatican. And it serves the Vatican purpose by Protestant tax dollars. The power to tax is the power to tyrannize. Whenever the government serves Antichrist, every dollar collected by it does likewise. It's extortion. They never tell you what intent and purpose they have for your hard-earned labor. It is to turn it into benefits for the Pope, to turn it into advancement for the papal system, to turn it into the advancement of a new world order that looks remarkably like the old world order where the Pope rules the world. Now, these are researchable things. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look them up yourself. He says he approached his job as director with the same can-do zeal he exhibited as a young man when he earned a Bronze Star as head of the Secret Intelligence Branch in Europe. So Donovan served the Pope in intelligence in Europe, too. So he knows what the world's made of. He knows what Europe's all about. He says, he comes with this European experience. You think that qualifies him for the American seat as the chief intelligence officer. But it's not an American intelligence. It's a papal intelligence. He says, now approaching 70, he flew around the globe in the CIA's black C-141 Starlifter at your tax expense, aggressively pursuing the mission which President Reagan entrusted to him to destroy communism, which means to advance popery. Okay? To destroy communism. To advance popery. You know what the Vatican's doing? It's literally appropriating it to itself, communism, and then being the administrator of the global communist system. And it looks like it's fighting for civil rights in the process, right? It touts itself as a global peacemaker, right? Why all the wars? If it was truly a peaceful organization, if the Vatican was truly a peaceful organization, wouldn't it expose who the one is who foments all the wars? But it doesn't, because it would blow its own cover. Bill Casey often made the Vatican his first stop when he visited Europe. William Casey, according to this Roman Catholic author, often made the Vatican his first stop when he visited Europe. The United States can't do anything without consulting the Antichrist of the Bible. Is this a Christian country? Do you catch yourself saying that America is the only Christian country in the world? It's not Christian at all. It's Roman Catholic. Stop calling it Christian. He says, again, CIA-Vatican contacts were not formal or extensive, but at the very least, the Church seems to have put the agency in contact with members of Solidarity. Solidarity was created by the papacy. It says the CIA then channeled funds, your funds, and equipment, your equipment, to support the group during martial law. Supported the Catholics in Poland during martial law. Your funds and your equipment, the CIA channeled them to the Roman Catholics in Poland during martial law in Poland. He says in revolutionary movements, the quintessential currency is communication, and so, as in Italy back in 1948, the CIA focused on cultivating this within Poland. Money went to funding underground anti-government publishing ventures. There's control of the press. And to supply radio transmitters, among other basic items. The equipment allowed Solidarity members to talk to each other and to broadcast from their own movable radio station located in the back of a van. All the while, the CIA used its own sophisticated electronic surveillance equipment to eavesdrop on Army communications, which were then passed on to Solidarity and very likely to the Vatican. So who does the CIA benefit? You or the Vatican? You, a Bible-believing Christian, or the Antichrist of the Bible? This is what happens when America becomes Catholic. All of its resources are directed to support the man of sin. The righteous now strengthen the wicked. That is the role of the American government. To redistribute the wealth of those who receive the blessing of God and give it to the wicked. He says, in keeping with Richard Allen's description of the quote-unquote silent alliance, Robert Gates, a name we should all be familiar with, another servant of the Pope, deputy director of intelligence at the time, acknowledges that, quote, there was considerable sharing of information, unquote, and a, quote, modicum of coordination, unquote, between the CIA and the Vatican, but reinforces the point that, quote, each of these institutions, for important reasons of its own, maintained a clear separation from the other in their activities, unquote. So there's even secrecy between the secret keepers, right? I'll tell you what, you don't want to wake up the Protestants. They're fast asleep. We're getting along with this Vatican agenda. And, we have to compartmentalize our operations. We can't even talk to one another about it. He said the Vatican would have been extremely reluctant to bridge its neutral and independent status by entering into clandestine activities with the United States or any other country. At the same time, any evidence that the CIA was colluding with either the Vatican or the Solidarity would only have undermined anti-government efforts within Poland. So secrecy surrounded this thing. And he says, like Casey, Vernon Walters continued to make Rome a frequent destination in his capacity as Ronald Reagan's ambassador at large, visiting 2 or 3 times a year. Walters was no intelligence novice himself, having served as deputy director of the CIA under Richard Nixon. Walters' portfolio under Ronald Reagan included the task of tightening ties with the Pope. After that first visit, described previously, in which he brought the satellite reconnaissance photos, Walters met the Pope one-on-one. Quote, "He always received me alone, and whenever anyone attempted to interrupt the briefing, he would wave them out of the room," unquote, Walters later wrote. Possibly this gesture was the Pope's way of making sure no leaks of American intelligence came from the Vatican. Or, I will add, maybe there really was more to this so-called secret alliance than anyone knows. And it says, for all the care both men took to keep their meetings private, the KGB formed the definite idea that the Vatican was involved in helping Solidarity with American collaboration. A 1948 KGB report claimed that the Pope's natural anti-communist leanings were amplified by, quote, reactionary political figures, especially the United States of America, unquote, and that the Vatican was planning, quote, an international alliance to combat communist ideology, unquote. The Pope rankled the Soviets by dealing firmly with the communists and by aggressively deploying his moral authority as he traveled the world. In the early spring of 1983, John Paul II took a historic trip to Central America that included a visit to Nicaragua, then under the control of the leftist Sandinistas. Some advisors in the Curia worried that the Pope would be courting disaster in Managua, where the Sandinistas had shown open contempt for the Catholic Church and where he was sure to encounter anti-Vatican demonstrators. To make matters a bit more complicated, a number of Catholic priests in Nicaragua openly supported the Sandinista government. Several even held positions within it despite orders from their religious superiors to step down. Altogether, Nicaragua represented a hornet's nest for political embarrassments for the Pope. Canceling the trip would have been the easiest option, as some in the Curia advised. John Paul II decided to go to Nicaragua. He began his visit at Managua's airport on April 4th, 1983, to openly reprimand Father Ernesto Cardenal, the Sandinistas' culture minister, on the tarmac. All right, obviously in front of the cameras. He's publicly denouncing this Sandinistas supporting cardinal. Quote, regularize your position with the church, unquote, he instructed Father Cardinal. A photograph of this encounter showing the stern-looking Pope wagging his finger at the kneeling priest was published in newspapers around the world. Later that day, as the Pope said Mass before 700,000 people at a Managua park, a group of Sandinistas tried to shout him down with slogans and jeers. Silencio! The Pope finally commanded with a flash of temper, then twice more until the rabble-rousers quieted. He told them to shut up, okay? It was a small gesture, but a sign that the Pope would brook no interruption. nor any attempts to turn his pastoral visit into a political sideshow. Tell me about it. It's all about politics, man. It might have been the Sandinista stage, but it was the Pope's script. 3 months after Managua, in June of '83, the Pope showed his mettle again. He returned to Poland in a far less conciliatory mood than in '79. Meeting General Jaruzelski, head of the military government, John Paul bluntly described his homeland as having become, quote, one great concentration camp under martial law. The New World Order, if you don't know it already, is going to be one global concentration camp under the headship of the Antichrist of the Bible, and only with the help of the United States and nations that were once Protestant. What an outrage. And you need to know about it, and you need to protest it. And we'll continue the protest on Inquisition Update tomorrow. Thanks for listening.